Hello, welcome to People, Planet, Profit, a podcast by EarthUP, where we aim to help businesses and people like you simplify sustainability. EarthUP CEO Stephen Bay will be joined by special guests to break down some of today's biggest topics affecting the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits. What does a sick building do to your health? Why should corporations be invested in biodiversity? How can I help create better working conditions and happier employees at my company? We'll cover these questions and so much more in a candid conversation about reshaping work culture into a landscape that prioritizes people and planet without sacrificing profit. Our next episode starts right now.
Hey, Peter. It's great to have you on your show. For everybody who's listening, this is the EarthUP podcast. We have Peter Allison, who's a safari guide, author, and just general badass on the show today. How you doing, Peter?
I'm well, thanks. How you doing?
I'm happy to have you on the show and have this discussion with you. Let's just kind of jump right in. We're talking about biodiversity. Why don't you just let us know how you became a safari guide, how you started writing books?
Safari guiding was something entirely unnatural and unexpected. I grew up in Sydney. The idea of being a safari guide was as realistic as becoming James Bond. But at 19, I jumped on a plane to Africa. Loved animals my whole life, and I wanted to travel for a year. It was actually my second gap year of sorts. I'd already done a year in Japan as well. And because of my passion for animals, while staying in a game reserve, I got offered a job as the barman. A bunch of guides fell over and they said, all you ever do is talk about animals. Go drive some tourists. That's how it began. And that was 1994. So my short trip to Africa is 27 years old.
And I know you've written a lot of books. Is that kind of what you talk about in your books, or what were you trying to accomplish?
I've written 2 books about Africa, and both of those are campfire stories, experiences as the world's least likely person to become a safari guide. I could brake cars but not fix them. I'm hopelessly uncoordinated. I once fractured my collarbone running. It's that bad. I mean, I didn't know how to drive. I had my first driving lesson the same day I took my first safari. So all of these things, it's the story of the catalogue of disasters. In it, of course, the idea is that while you're laughing, hopefully you'll learn a bit as well. That was always the point.
Yeah, just have fun. Nice. And so you've been an animal lover your whole life. When did it kind of go into conservationist, or is that something that you've always kind of been focused on?
Growing up in Australia, TV was very Anglo-centric, it was very English. So we had the benefit of David Attenborough documentaries, and the conservation was leaking in even back early 80s when I would have been watching those. So you're aware that it's not all rosy for animals. And then once I became a safari guide, of course, the first few years, it's adventure, it's fun, this is amazing. And I was experiencing things effectively as a tourist, but then you come face to face with it. I saw poached rhinos. I saw the carcasses of poached animals. I saw animals that had got out of a protected reserve into a community and been slaughtered in what seemed a very cruel way. And ultimately, you realize conservation is a luxury. So the best thing you can do is start engaging with the communities, making them benefit from the very wildlife that we're getting a thrill from. And that's something I've really swung over to now. I still love to go out and watch animals, but I'm particularly interested in the more innovative ways of how humans and animals can coexist peripherally. Something I learned from guiding is conservation is a dead serious issue, and we all know it. It's very like medicine, and we know that medicine is good for us, but you don't want to take it necessarily. You've got to coat it in a lot of sugar to get people to swallow that pill. So if people come on safari and have a fantastic time and they fall in love with the area, only then are they going to be interested in protecting and maybe looking more closely at their own backyard and saying, what could I do at home as well, rather than just caring about a place over there.
And I know what you just kind of described as a problem that sustainability's had too for the last forever. People are like, if you care about the world, don't eat meat. Yeah. You have to do the same thing. You have to just create awareness, create engagement with that cause, and then slowly try to bring them along with little baby steps. It's progress, not perfection, but it's also just slowly getting people to realize that there's benefits. Like what we're talking about isn't like a charity case. There's benefits when it comes to the individual for taking sustainability actions, and there's benefits for the individual when they start to focus on conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing you've almost got to do with conservation is understand, for the mountain of bad news that gets through, there's a lot of good work being done. Conservation, sustainability, let's throw them in the same bucket. A lot of good work being done. There's a lot of good results occurring that typically they don't make the news. The old news saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Bad news gets more clicks. So yeah, I think it's important to be able to just forgive yourself. I mean, if I was a true conservationist, I wouldn't have the 2 least sustainable things in the world going to bed upstairs from us right now. The least sustainable thing I've ever done is had kids.
Yeah.
And you measure it that way. Owning pets is not sustainable. But I grew up with pets, and it grew my love for animals. So at some point, you've got to say, no, there are benefits to this. And I think it's the same thing with what you're alluding to there. As an individual, by just trying a bit better, you're doing great things for the world. And there are absolute returns on that. And I think part of the problem is so many people, and what you were talking about sustainability, people either yawn and do the exaggerated yawn, patting their mouth, or they think it's some kind of hippie ding battery, whatever they want to throw about. There's a lot of really serious, scientifically minded people and scientists, PhDs, hell of a lot smarter than most of us, and they're on our side. But I talk a lot about conservation and why it's important to people who don't like animals. And we can start with some really obscure stuff, but if you go into things straight away, as any single person watching this is unfortunately, and I don't wish this on anyone, going to be affected by cancer at some point. The cure for cancer, for all the work being done in laboratories, is already in nature. Consider an elephant, adult male, about 5,500 kilos, that's 11,000 pounds or so. Think of how many cells it takes to make up that. So think then of proportionally what their cancer rate should be. Their mortality rate from cancer is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent versus us, where I think it's somewhere between 3 and 5. And that was noticed way back in the 60s. The big animals don't seem to die from cancer. And there's a key thing there is not that they don't get it. They don't die from it. They do get it. They get it each and every day, and their bodies cure it. And there's no magic to this. The best work has all been happening in recent years in the US, starting in University of Salt Lake. A guy called Dr. Joshua Schiffman. He's a pediatric oncologist, and he read about this thing with elephants. And he managed to convince a circus, I think it was, to let him draw blood. And he found a protein in there. It's called P53. He knew it well because in the human body, there's 2 varieties. And we know that when a tumor develops, P53 comes and attacks the tumor with success sometimes and other times not. So we got 2 types. Almost straight away, he discovered 30 more new varieties that elephants have. They don't have the 2 we've got. They've got their own versions of this, nuking tumors. And we don't have to kill elephants to synthesize this. This is the amazing thing. To get to the great size, you have to be able to beat cancer. These giant animals around the world with different lineages have all got ways to beat cancer. And if we are so busy wiping these things off the planet, we're missing the chance to grab a 3 billion year old laboratory. Their life's been around about 3 billion years, and the elephant is one result of all the experimentation, and a great white shark is another, and a blue whale is another. They're all other experimental results. And to get there, they've been put through a hell of a lot more testing than someone with a Petri dish and a lifespan of 50, 60 years. So we know that we've just discovered that the only place in the world where we have not found bacteria is on a dragonfly's wings. And before this COVID palaver, it was said the greatest public health threat was antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And now we found the one thing that can wipe it out, and it's dragonfly wings. So you might be sitting in LA or New York and going, I don't care about dragonflies and I care less about elephants, but they might save your life.
Well, and what you're saying right now is biodiversity is extremely important, right? No matter where you are in the world and what you enjoy on the personal side of things, right? Biodiversity is something that we can't do without. Everybody knows about the bees at this point, right? Without bees, there's no crops. There's some grocery store, and I think it was in the Netherlands, that's like had a day that said what our shelves would look like without bees. And they took all the produce and they took everything off their shelves because they're like, we won't be in business without bees. It shows why big companies and big investment groups are now focusing on companies that focus on ESGs, not just to protect the interest of their supply chains, but also to protect the interest of the world and being able to solve a lot of the problems. We look at what you're talking about as biomimicry. Biomimicry has solved so many different problems, and I think it's one of the most exciting areas to look into. And as we start to see forests and wetlands start to disappear more rapidly, which they are, we're losing the opportunity to tap into all that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I was mentioning there the big obvious elephant, the elephant in the room being the elephant in that case. And again, these opportunities are out there. Why compete with the 3 billion years that life's been at it, doing the work for us? It's out there. And again, every time we lose a species, it's like burning down a laboratory before you've got its results. And that's, what a waste. We've lost species. We've lost the passenger pigeon in the US. We lost the dodo from Mauritius. We've lost all of these things, and we're on the verge of losing so many more. And it's not just about medical advancements. It's just about making our lives better. I mean, there's a place in Botswana, and it's got the non-melodic name of the Mahari pans, biggest network of salt pans on the planet. And there are places out there where it's nothing but horizon. But anyway, out there, very, very little growing, because it was once the floor of a lake, and all of those sediments and salts, the minerals have settled. Not a lot of rain, a lot of minerals, too much for the plants to grow. Yet NASA identified it as the 5th or 6th most nutrient-rich place on the planet. It's far more nutrient-rich than the Amazon. And why that's important if you're living in North America is that every year there is a wind that is reliable while the climate stays stable, that picks up the nutrients which are lighter than the minerals. And they fly around the world and they land in the wheat belt of the United States. One of the reasons why food is grown there is because you're getting Kalahari nutrients. You're getting the goodness from a lake, from hippo dung that is hundreds of thousands of years old, are fertilizing your crops there. And there was a year that the winds shifted and it actually caused a brownout in New York. It caused this massive Dubai-type sandstorm in New York. The guys had to buy supplementary fertilizer that year.
It just shows how everything that we take for granted is all very fragile. You don't understand the things that are going to happen once we start seeing these things disappear, right? And then they're disappearing faster than ever. This leads the conversation to, what a lot of companies are doing from a sustainability department's perspective. One of the things that they've been doing as a lot of companies make their climate commitments is they've been buying carbon offsets. And at first there were some companies around not sure about the legitimacies of these, but that's all kind of been squashed since then. But what I really think is cool, and what's been coming up more and more, is the additional benefits that go with carbon offset projects. And if companies are really trying to focus on their ESGs, they can solve a lot of their ESGs just based on the carbon offset programs. They choose blue carbon offset, green carbon offsets, ones that have like cooking stoves. Is there any carbon offset projects that are really helping promote biodiversity?
I would think anything that is protecting not just forests, but grasslands as well. I think forests get the big hurrah and hooray. Grasslands are equally as important for biodiversity. Grassland gives you the grazers. What would the world be without zebras? Quite often a grassland protects real amazing nutrient areas. There is a program I know of right now, and it's got the hefty and credible weight of National Geographic behind it. And it's a place called the Lasema ecosystem, and it's in Angola. And Angola went through a horrific, almost 3-decade-long civil war. But as that settled, a lot of people who'd actually stayed away from some of these areas are moving in, and they're slash and burning. But in the highlands of Angola, you have river systems, and they feed a river called the Conde that is one of the only ones that flows through a hyper-arid desert. The Cubango and the Quito, which go on to form the Okavango Delta, the biggest oasis in the world. The Lewa that flows into a part of Zambia where you have the biggest mammal migration in Africa actually goes there. And it's not wildebeest, it's actually bats. You have all of these amazing rivers coming out of this one place. And that is something which, if National Geographic is working on carbon offsets in protecting that area. And it's not buying it, it's leasing it. I think we've got so much less colonial with conservation in the attitude of, well, we'll just buy it from them, toss them some beads. Now it is, how do we make this sustainable for the people whose land it is? Absolutely have a far greater claim to it than any of us do, and don't need a finger wagging saying, why are you slashing and burning? Yeah, that's what a terrible thing to do. And so I think we, broadly speaking, in conservation have got so much better at saying this only works if the people who live here, who own this land, are the custodians of it. I think there's those opportunities, but again, also look close to home and learn about it. And you spoke about vegetarianism. There's meat-free Mondays, there's all of that. Just don't eat meat for lunch for a week and see how it goes. Right. I was a big meat eater. I've married a vegetarian, and I would say I eat meat now maybe once a week. It's just been this gradual erosion, and I don't miss it. It hasn't been cold turkey. And again, far better for the environment. Probably one of the better things I've done in my life is just slow my meat consumption.
And what those little acts individually do is they create awareness about bigger problems. And you mentioned grassland. So if you are going to eat meat, which I do eat meat, buy organic, right? Organic, regenerative stuff that comes from regenerative agriculture protects the grasslands. There's choices you can make too that you're not really making sacrifices. It's just being aware. And this is something that companies have that same ability, but they have such a bigger impact that they can do. Yeah. So if you can take individuals starting to realize, I need to get organic because of regenerative agriculture, which is a carbon sink, which means I'm going to get more nutrients because more nutrients come from the soil. And then they're able to bubble these things up to the organization and really help their organization solve these complex problems. And one of the things, like I was saying, is that's really, really cool is the convergence of biodiversity and carbon offset programs, because it's been really hard to get money to save species. And I know one of our partners was talking that it's like $8 million to save the lemurs around Madagascar. And it's not not quite enough as a carbon offset program. But if you're able to figure out how to combine that biodiversity element with the carbon offset element, you can really start saving the world, not from a, hey, look, let's let the lemurs live in trees, but saving the world and say, hey, look, let's keep these areas preserved so that we can benefit from these preserved areas.
You also got to remember that a lot of people who are sitting in a Madagascar or a Botswana, which I know particularly well, having lived there a long time, there's no spite in what they're doing. And they're not bad people and they're not stupid people. I think that's the assumption we often jump to, but they haven't necessarily had the education opportunities. And education is not just schooling. I'm talking about they haven't traveled. There hasn't been the economic opportunity for them to travel the way that some of us might have done. So I was at one point, I used to train safari guides, and as an experiment, and not to poke fun in any way, but I was asking them, where else, apart from Africa, do you get lions? And the answers I got were just names they'd picked from all over the world. And they're very well educated in a narrow band. Like they could say, this is a puff adder, it has cytotoxic venom, which breaks down your cell walls, causing something like gangrene. And they knew and they understood the words they were saying, but they didn't know that the rattlesnakes of North America have almost identical adaptations because they just hadn't been exposed to it. So to them, it's not a crisis that elephants are being hit in large numbers by poachers in Botswana because all of their lives there's been plenty of them and they've got to be coming from somewhere. So again, I think we've just got to stop demonizing a lot of these local communities and understand that the ones to demonize quite often are ourselves. We're driving the demand for it. This consistent demand for economic growth has really been what's pushed it. You know, we've seen now with the economic growth in China, not an educational growth with it in terms of wildlife. That's been devastating for elephants. By the time we're done with this, statistically, I would say it's normally 1 every 15 minutes elephants will have been poached. And I don't want to demonize China. In fact, they've done some extraordinarily positive things with sustainability. Chinese leading the way in a lot of the solar tech, a lot of the greening of buildings. So this is not blasting them, but bloody hell, I wish someone there would stand up and say, stop buying ivory. Someone in real power. That's where the ivory's going. It's going to China. And of course, if you're sitting in Botswana, your salaries, whatever it is, it's a lot of money being offered to you.
There's just so many things that we haven't tapped into. Sustainability is just longevity. It's just about being here as long as possible. Profitability isn't the enemy of sustainability. You mentioned reducing the amount of meat you can eat, but when it comes to conservation, what are some things that they can kind of do at home? You know, is traveling to Africa and going on a trip, is that helping conservation? Is telling their employers to focus on carbon offsets from specific areas? What are some good options for conservation?
Absolutely. Bang the drum. I know people are concerned about that. They're concerned it's going to affect how they're perceived at work. But at the end of all of this, do you want to be the person that towed the line all the way through, or be the person that spoke up? And there's a great quote from Winston Churchill, that very little known, but he said, I don't trust a person who has no enemies. It means they've never stood up for anything. And if you're saying, let's make the world a better place with something that costs us either very little or might even generate profit, and you have animosity towards you from that, did you want to be friends with that person? So bang the drum there. And then yes, something you've led to there is absolutely go on a safari. Yes, I do work for a safari company. And yes, our profits are based on people coming on safari. But when people ask who our competitors are, they're expecting me to name people that have camps in the same price bracket, in the same area. But my answer is always agriculture and mining. Because the moment the government of Botswana or Namibia or Angola, the moment these areas of land are not generating revenue, and just as importantly, are not employing a great number of people, the moment we're not doing that, then that land has zero value to a politician. Politicians care about who's going to vote for them or contribute to their campaigns, and rhinos and elephants don't vote. So basically, come on safari, you're going to have a fantastic time. You're going to see amazing things. Just the smell in the air will be something you're going to want to bottle and take home with you. It's so much more than watching wildlife. It's the things you do as well. Those are the memories. You remember the things you did, not just the stuff you saw. And you are a philanthropist, whether you want to be or not. The company I work for, Natural Selection, we set it up with the idea that we would give 1.5% of turnover. We're inspired by Patagonia, the clothing company, who do 1%. We said, let's up it. 1.5% for conservation, and that's before we even look at profits. Our aim is $1 million a year that we can put directly back into conservation. And conservation can be different things. One of the things we do, I mentioned those villages. Kids in one of those villages have to walk either 8 or 12 kilometers, 5 to 7 or 8 miles, roughly, to get to school, either way, and back through an area that 40,000 elephants transit through each year, and it has the highest concentration of lions in the Okavango Delta. We were just starting up. We couldn't build them a school and pay a teacher yet. We'll get to that. But we've bought 2 minivans, hired 2 drivers, and they do the school runs. 176 children now get delivered safely every day to and from school. In the middle of the day, we use the vans to take the elderly to clinic visits. We have a little roster, and the elderly can go and visit the village nurse, whatever it might be. That doesn't sound like conservation necessarily, but when you reduce that conflict between the people and the animals, and they know what our ambitions are, there's no retaliatory killing of elephants. These are the people that live right there. My daughter's started school a little while ago. Imagine having to send her off. I've got to go out and tend crops or tend cattle. I've got to let a 4.5-year-old walk to school by herself. I don't want to do it in the UK because of cars and just humans. Throw in elephants, lions, leopards. Those are the things they've got to worry about. I mean, it's a level of stress I can't comprehend. So if we can take that stress away from them, we're being good neighbors. And that's sustainability.
100%. And something you said that is extremely important nowadays is to stand up. And I love that Winston Churchill quote, right? If you don't have enemies, I don't trust you. Because it's a time in our society where that's across all areas. One of the silver linings that came out of 2020 is a lot of people started to put their foot down and said no more. And that has the exact same thing to do with the ESGs. And the reason I like the term ESGs more than I like the term sustainability, because sustainability kind of people picture a tree hugger doing those types of things. But ESG really lets you focus on the social and the environmental and the governance of it all. And so what you just talked about is sustainability. If you're speaking to somebody back in the States or in the UK or in Europe that is in an HR or CSR role, what are some things and tips that you would give them from an outsider's perspective around how they should engage in sustainability, how they should engage in ESGs?
It begins with education, but make it fun. Give people something to support or not. I think everything should be opt-in rather than opt-out. The rise of militant conservation, militant veganism we all make fun of, it drives people away. So just say, here's a program we're supporting, and here is why it's cool. And then also fill your office with plants. There is something that does actually do positive things to our body being around plants. And this is not hippie stuff. There's science behind it. Those plants are a habitat for something. It's just a small start. If there's a bug on it, it flies out the window and a bird eats it, you fed the bird. And that bird then feeds a bigger bird, which, there's knock-on effects.
Now it's time for the quick hitter section of our podcast. What gets you up in the morning every day?
I want to put in more than I take out.
What's your favorite breakfast drink?
Coffee.
Coffee. Is there a book you would recommend for really trying to understand biodiversity, some of the knowledge that you kind of went over today?
I think anything by E.O. Wilson. He's an amazing writer. There's also a guy called David Quammen. And then if you want to laugh, read one of my books. Whatever you do, don't run or don't look behind you.
Is there any technology that you're really excited about that's coming out from a biodiversity or carbon offsetting perspective?
Yeah, it's just reading about new designs for wind turbines. And I don't know if the turbine's even the right word anymore. They have no blades. So one is a tower and it vibrates. So there's no risk to birds. And another one was almost like a trampoline turned up. So again, no blades spinning to chop up birds and bats. But as the wind hits it, it moves in and out. It pulls on the springs and that generates the electricity. You go, oh, clever.
What's one thing that you would recommend somebody to take up in their daily routine?
I don't like to be preachy, but maybe just think, do you need it? The most dangerous word in the world is more. We never, very, very rarely saying let's have less in our lives. So just, do you need it? I'm so cruel to my kids. I always say, if you buy that toy, a gorilla dies.
That's great.
They're going to be CEOs.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on.
And that's our episode. To learn more about Scope 4 and ways to empower employees to become sustainability champions, or for more resources on how to reduce your carbon footprint, visit earthup.eco and start your free trial today. Thank you so much for listening in and for your support. If you like our show, hit that subscribe button, tell a friend, and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Your support helps us reach a wider audience, so thank you. To learn more about EarthUP and our journey to creating a platform that helps companies and communities simplify sustainability, visit earthup.eco and follow EarthUp on LinkedIn.